Good evening, everyone. My name is Mishka Ligot, and I'd like to welcome all of you watching from the comfort and safety of your respective homes to the second installment of Wisconsin Wednesdays, featuring novelists Anthony Doerr, Quan Barry, and Lysley Tenorio, in conversation with Ron Kuka. Our next event is on October 21. That's a Wednesday, 7 p.m., and will feature Elizabeth Ames Stout, The Others Gold, and Meg Wade's Slick Like Dark. Wisconsin Wednesdays is an online reading series brought to you by the UW-Madison Program in Creative Writing and the Wisconsin Book Festival. In light of the current health crisis, Wisconsin Wednesdays was designed to continue with the program and foundation's practice of hosting brilliant writers, many of them alumni of the program, currently promoting their new books. Along with rising to the challenge of social distancing measures and the inability to gather in person, we hope that Wisconsin Wednesdays, through its new virtual platform, is also able to carry out the Wisconsin idea, which declares that the borders of the university are also the borders of the state. So we welcome you, whether you're joining us from Madison, Milwaukee, Marshfield, Marinette, Mineral Point, Menominee, Manitowoc, Miquon, or anywhere else in the state, the US, or the world. You may notice that a number of our events are on a Tuesday, such as tonight, but you may also agree that Wisconsin Wednesday simply rolls off the tongue in such a smooth and pleasing way. We'd also like to take a moment to thank and promote our partnering independent bookstores from all over Wisconsin: Our Room of One Zone in Madison, the Bookstore in Appleton, the Village Booksmith in Baraboo, Honest Dog Books in Bayfield, Redberry Books in Cable, Inklink Books in East Troy, Daughters Books in Eau Claire, Woodland Pattern in Milwaukee, Foxden Books in River Falls, Arcadia Books in Spring Green, Mind Chimes Bookshop in Three Lakes, and Driftless Books and Music in Viroqua. Please continue to support your local bookstores throughout this pandemic and consider placing an order for tonight's books through any of these establishments tonight. Most offer shipping and contactless curbside pickup. You can find their contact information on our webpage, tinyurl.com/whiskweds. That's tinyurl.com/whiskweds. Before we proceed with the reading, we'd also like to recognize that Wisconsin Wednesdays is being broadcasted to you from Tijo, traditional Ho-Chunk land historically ceded and occupied through unjust legislations and treaties, such as the Indian Removal Act of 1830. We recognize the Ho-Chunk as the original and true stewards of this land and honor their continued resilience and resistance, along with that of 11 other First Nations that reside in the areas of this state. Finally, in the spirit of resilience and humanity's collective capacity for resourcefulness, we'd like to thank you, viewers, for your patience with this new online format. Please bear with us should there be any technical issues that may arise during the reading. We'll have some time for Q&A with the authors after they both read, so please use the box at the bottom of the Crowdcast page to submit any questions you have for the authors at any time during the reading. And we'll do our best to accommodate these queries later on during the event. So tonight's event will be moderated by Ron Kuka, who is a faculty associate and creative writing program coordinator at UW-Madison. Take it away, Ron.
Hey, thank you, Mishka. When Amy asked me to do this, probably about a month ago, her only stipulation was just make it fun. And, not feeling any pressure there, but I thought what could be more fun than doing the broadcast while I'm teaching in class? So what you can't see right now is I've got a whole classroom full of students all masked up, all sort of literary bandits there, who generate a lot of questions for tonight's discussion. Anyway, we've got three heavyweights going at it tonight in front of us. So I'm gonna to keep the bios very short. In fact, I'm gonna speed read them right off the book jackets so that we can just move right through that. Because one thing I'm known for really is going on and on in introductions. They get inflated, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to start with Leslie, and this is right off his book jacket of The Son of Good Fortune. Here you see it. So here we go. Lysley Tenorio is the author of the story collection Monstrous, a great one, by the way, named a Book of the Year by San Francisco Chronicle. He's a recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a Whiting Award, a Stigner Fellowship, and the Rome Prize from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Oh, take a breath. As well as residencies from the MacDowell Coloniado. And how do you pronounce this? Bolesquio Foundation? What was that? Okay. His stories appeared everywhere and have been adapted by the Conservatory Theater in San Francisco and the Mayu Theater in New York City. He's a professor currently at St. Mary's College of California. Wow, how long did that take? 30 seconds. Okay. Now, Quan Barry. is raised in the coastal town of Danvers, Massachusetts. She's the author of a novel, She Weeps Every Time You're Born, and 4 books of poetry, including the collection Water Puppets, which won the AWP Donald Hall Prize for Poetry and was a PEN Open Book finalist. She lives in Wisconsin currently and teaches right here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Tony Doerr. Oh, there you go. Hey, thank you, guys. Tony Doerr is the author of the story, and this is off of all the light we cannot see, so it's an old bio. He's the author of the story collection Memory Wall, The Shell Collector, the novel About Grace, and the memoir 4 Seasons in Rome. He's won numerous prizes in both the United States, overseas, including 4 O. Henry Prizes, 3 Pushcarts, Rome Prize, the New York Public Library's Young Lions Award, etc. What's not on here, because this is old, is the fact that he won the damn Pulitzer Prize for this book. How awesome is that? Anyway, before we move on to the questions, I thought it'd be best if we now give each of the authors just a brief minute or two to read from their books. This is mostly, like I said, a celebration of the 2 most current books that are out, Quan Barry's and Lysley Tenorio. So whichever one of you guys wants to go first, that'd be great.
So Leslie, you want to duke it out?
Go for it.
Okay, great. I just want to say thank you, Ron, for doing this. Thank you to the Wisconsin Book Festival for having us. So when Ron just now was reading our author flaps, the one thing that perhaps got left out is how the 3 of us know each other. So
I was going to say that.
Well, hey, so again, we were all fellows here at the University of Wisconsin from 1999 to 2000. So that's how we all know each other. That's actually where I learned how to write fiction. I was in a writing group with these 2 guys because I was primarily a poet at that time. So it's great to be again with my old cohort, even if we are like in separate squares, like Hollywood squares. It's great to be here. So anyway, I'm going to read a really brief section from my book, We Ride Upon Sticks. Basically, my book is set in the 1980s, and it follows a girls' field hockey team in Massachusetts as they begin to use witchcraft in order to win games. And so the little section I'm going to read right now, when I played field hockey, we always were trying to raise money because we always wanted to have jackets and swag and all kinds of stuff like that. And so it was like every weekend we would have a car wash. So in downtown Danvers, where I was raised, like we would be out there with our buckets and our sponges. It would be car wash city. So the part that I'm going to read it talks about something that happens at one of the car washes that the field hockey team is throwing to raise money. A silver Mercedes convertible rolled in, its windows tinted a dark black like peering head on into midnight. Girl Corey took the money proffered by 2 slim fingers slipped through the window, which the driver immediately rolled back up. She handed the money to Jen Fiorenza, who held the bill up to her face, pouring over every inch of it as if she'd forgotten her loot. We crowded around, eager to find out what the deal was. On the front of the bill was some guy we'd never seen before. The guy with a beard and a ragged peninsula of hair projecting out into what would be the water of his face. Ulysses S., said Heather Houston, our 18th president. As always, she was right on the money, pun intended. It was a $50 bill. Then we realized there were 2 of them. Girl Corey took the bills back from Jen and tossed them in the tin. We got to work on what now appeared to us as the most beautiful car we'd ever seen. The thing so stately, you could bury the Pope in it. When we were almost done, Girl Corey slipped her own car keys out of her pocket. It was insane how breezily she did what she did. She might have been humming Moon River in her head. She might have been lazing by the ocean under a parasol in an impressionist painting. She looked so cool and collected. Blithely, she proceeded to walk the length of the Mercedes. With one hand, she pointed at something out in the road, as if whatever was out there had her full and undivided attention. But with her other hand, she slowly scraped her Fiero key down the length of the car's flank. My huckleberry friend, Moon River, and me. What are you doing? Hissed A.J. Johnson. The scratch was like drawing a Frankenstein scar on the Mona Lisa. Even Jen Fiorenza looked shocked, her claw with its mouth hanging open. Don't worry about it, Girl Corey responded. With her knuckles, she rapped lightly on the Mercedes trunk, our signal to the driver that we were finished. With a sprightly toot of its horn, the silver convertible pulled out and sailed down Locust, its side marred like a tree that's been blasted by lightning. It was only later we found out that the Mercedes belonged to Girl Corey's mom. And in less than a week, her mom was seen floating around town in some fancy new red contraption called a Lexus. They say a high tide floats all boats. Guess it all depends on where you're standing in relation to the water. Girl Corey had her license plate officially transferred from the Fiero. Now the silver convertible with the huckleberry scar was all hers. Her stepdad Larry offered to get it fixed, but girl Corey said no. She liked the Mercedes just the way it was, ruined. We wondered if her parents ever suspected what really went down.
Woo! Fieros are dope.
Leslie, you're up.
Okay, I'm just gonna read like 2 pages, which will hopefully go quickly, just a little bit of context. So The Son of Good Fortune is about a mother and son, Excel, who is this 19-year-old Filipino undocumented immigrant, and his mother, Maxima, who is a former B-action movie star turned internet scam artist. They're both undocumented. And every year for Excel's birthday, Maxima likes to tell the story of his birth. And as it happened, he was born on a plane on a flight from Manila to San Francisco. And this is the story that Maxima tells Excel every year. I think that should be enough context. It's a 17-hour flight. By the 5th hour, Maxima can feel how pregnant she really is. Her seat is like a fist squeezing her body. Her back aches, her feet swell, and the passenger to her left, a nun who looks like she's 15, hogs the entire armrest. But America is the only choice, Maxima tells herself, her only hope. What's left for her back home? She has no job, no income, no family. The movies don't want her anymore. She's finally rid of the eye patch wearing son of a bitch, better to raise her baby on her own anyway. And her sister, Queenie, her only real family, is trapped in Saudi Arabia forever. She will be a live-in maid the rest until she dies. Thank God for Joker, still loyal after all these years. He's promised her a good place to live, will arrange whatever paperwork she and the baby need to stay in California. Had she known it would be this easy, maybe she would have come a long time ago. But then the plane shakes, hard as an earthquake, despite no solid ground beneath. The captain requests all passengers take their seats and fasten their seatbelts, but Maxima is too miserably pregnant to buckle up, so she just grips her armrest and whispers a prayer to herself and her baby. Let us fly through the air safely, she says. Let us land on the ground softly. But the side-to-side shaking, Maxima fears, will somehow hurt the baby, and she wonders if leaving home is her all-time #1 mistake, if the smartest thing a person can do is stay in the place where you were born. The turbulence ends, the plane cruises again. Maxima closes her eyes just to rest them, then falls into a sleep so deep that she dreams she's already in America, lying in a clean, comfortable bed with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge, until the room tilts one way, then the other, then forward, then back, and the dream becomes an earthquake again, one so real that she's jolted awake. But instead of the plane's violent shaking or sudden plunge, her body seems to pop. She inhales sharply, feels a warmth gushing over her seat, down her thighs and legs, then everywhere. Maxima has been punched, kicked, judo flipped, has even rolled out of a moving Jeep. But her body was trained. She always knew how to get back up. Now, squeezed in her window seat, she's helpless against the pain. She looks at the snoring nun beside her, taps her shoulder several times. "Excuse me, sister," she says. "Excuse me?" But the nun just sleeps, so Maxima pounds her fist like a hammer on the nun's thigh, and the nun shrieks awake. "Help me," Maxima says. In minutes, 3 flight attendants walk Maxima to the front of the plane, where they've cleared the final 2 rows in first class. With great luck, the plane is full of nurses, Filipinos hoping for work in the US hospitals, and 4 of them tend to Maxima. They give her water, dab her face and neck with cold towels, time her contractions. They come and go in shifts, except for one, a male nurse named Rocky, who has been close by from the beginning and will be there until the end. "Huwag kang mag-alala," he says. "Don't worry, honey, you're in good hands." He fans her with what Maxima realizes is her own plane ticket, so that she sees, flitting back and forth just above her face, her name and confirmation number, XL0426. "XL," she whispers to herself. "Excel, Excel, Excel." The rhythm of the letters like an incantation, a one-word prayer. Rocky leans closer, not quite hearing her. "Excel," she says, "so that whenever I say my baby's name, it also means be good, be the best." She takes a deep breath, nods to herself. "Excel, diba?" More turbulence, a jolt, and Excel is born. His arrival, the end of Maxima's story. Thank you.
You played.
Hey, Tony, I mean, you don't have a book coming out right now. Do you have a couple of pages? Nope.
I don't think so. This is about
Okay.
those two.
Okay,
people.
okay, we can roll with that.
I mean, I can if we get really bored later. I can read like from some of my son's student papers.
Okay, that'd be great. So let's schedule that for 10:10 tonight. So anyway, we've got two kinds of questions. Some of these questions are specifically for one of the three authors, and then there's some that are addressed to everyone, everybody. So what I thought I would do is I'd read the one specifically for one of you. And what I could do is I could read three of them first to give you a little time to think about the answer, if you like. So anyway, here's the first one. This one goes to Quan Barry. And it's as follows. Woo! Finally, a novel about women's sports. A friend of mine says he can tell just by their walk or their attitude which sport a man played in high school. Can you tell the difference between a volleyball player, swimmer, or field hockey player using similar criteria?
Shit, this is a difficult question. Let me think. I was on a walk the other day and I was walking past the people who were playing volleyball. So yes, volleyball would be the easiest one to, because although I suppose I have a niece who plays volleyball and she's only maybe about 5'5". So again, height-wise, right? But I do think that the question, like they're getting at something about swagger, which I'm going to like steer back to my book, right? So it's true that these girls have like serious swagger about them that maybe, especially in the 80s, that, that was the sport that was like the badass sport to play in many ways. That's kind of why a lot of us chose it. It's because you had stick and you got to hit stuff. Particularly in the 1980s, there wasn't a lot of room for women to like work out their aggressions. Like now, women can play ice hockey, women can play lacrosse, women can play rugby, all that kind of fun stuff. But in the 80s, it was field hockey. That was it. So when it comes to like, can I tell if I look at somebody? I can also tell by their accent because field hockey is much more of an East Coast thing. But I can tell though if somebody has a certain swagger if they played a stick sport. So yes.
I love that. Okay, Lysley, here's a chicken and egg question. Who came first in your imagination? Excel, the shy protagonist of The Son of Good Fortune, or Maxima, his awesome martial artist and catfishing mom? And once you introduced one, how did the later one influence the former?
Right. They kind of both sort of rose up into my head at the same time. The earliest draft of this book was about these DVD sniffing dogs and these DVD pirate assassins who were going to try to assassinate the dogs. That novel certainly didn't work out. But what was still in that draft was this mother-son relationship. That was the most intriguing aspect of the book. And as I worked on those characters more, one thing I did realize, I think I thought much more about Maxima. I think in a lot of, if you want to say immigrant fiction, you kind of see this archetype of the sort of fiercely silent immigrant mother who might, have an outburst or, some kind of, external, manifestation of her strength, maybe in a pivotal scene at the end. I really wanted to have an immigrant mother who was not only emotionally and psychologically strong, but physically strong. I wanted her to be physically formidable. And I wanted that to be apparent from the beginning so that Excel hopefully realizes the strongest person he has ever known, emotionally and physically, is his mother. I also grew up watching Linda Carter, Wonder Woman, The Bionic Woman, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is my all-time favorite show. So I love a good, strong, physically strong female character. And I spent a lot of time trying to build a character like Maxima who would hopefully also be, persuasive and realistic, even though she's kind of outrageous at times. So I think Maxima was more of my focus earlier on.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Lysley.
Did you research births on planes, Lysley?
Did I what?
Research live birth on planes, on airplanes? Has that happened before?
It's happened several times. So be careful on your next flight.
It's happened to me.
That's a whole other story. I didn't realize you were expecting, but that's a whole other story.
That's what this talk is really about.
Oh, yeah.
But Lysley, I want to ask a follow-up question that maybe Tony also has a thought to too. So you talked about, because I remember when you used to talk about that other book you were working on, again, because it was based on a true story about these dogs that would sniff out actual, so a lot of people maybe don't remember, but DVDs, right? And so dogs would sniff them out because DVDs were being pirated, right? And so I was just curious to know, like, the idea of like when you move on from a book, when you realize it's not working, like when do you have to, and Antonia, have you ever had the experience of being like, I'm working on something and now I gotta jettison it? So like what was the deal with the DVDs dog sniffing book?
You know, I spent my first sabbatical on that draft of that novel. And by the end of sabbatical, I kind of realized I was just sort of forcing myself to write it. I mean, it was fun to write, you know, those scenes where you have, you know, these dogs that are about to be assassinated, or, you know, they're trying, the bounty hunters are trying to assassinate them. But, you know, it was all surface level kicks. You know, it wasn't, I didn't really care about the material. All I really cared about was the mother and son in that story. And, you know, by the end of sabbatical, I realized I don't really care about this, so I got to move on. What do I care about though? What aspect of the book do I care about? And that's sort of what I clung on to.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's such a circuitous path, and I hope that's useful for people to hear, especially in your class, Ron, who are getting started in writing. It's so rare that you end up where you think you were going to end up. I had about 90 pages about Lieutenant William Gorgas, who was this guy, along with Walter Reed, whose name is in the news right now, who helped eradicate yellow fever from Panama and really helped the Americans build the canal. And I was so interested. It was Zika was kind of sweeping around. I was so interested in like these tiny little creatures carrying this disease. And I'd even emailed with Amy about like talking about, yellow fever in Philadelphia, and just, you know, how incredible race was really tied up, and how and poverty, you know, was considered like a dirty disease, and it affected poor people. And I was just so into this whole, that's kind of this tiny thing to create this huge, incredibly large, you know, manifest destiny project to cut through a whole continent. And I'm totally in love with all the research and working on it, but I just realized like this is a story I'm not capable of telling yet. And I don't know if I'll ever go back to it. And that's okay. Like I learned a bunch of interesting stuff. I think I got into this to learn interesting things. And you can't be like you can't be prisoner to efficiency all the time. Sometimes you have to just go explore and run through the garden and see where you end up. And if you don't end up in a place that you can make a product that enters the stream of capitalism, that's okay sometimes.
Oh, that's awesome. I got a question for you, Tony.
Okay.
Here it is. I Googled all the light we cannot see, and your book wasn't even in the top 10 results. I got instead a bunch of books about your novel.
Oh, okay.
So my question is, have you ever read the Cliff Notes on All the Light We Cannot See? And how would that experience compare to having an out-of-body experience?
That's hilarious. I have not. I try not to read. I'm not as good as Amy, who is so good about not reading stuff written about her work, but it's really, there's a lot of amazing books in the world. And if you spend any of your reading allotment reading about your own books, like you're wasting your time. Like you got to go get to some Virginia Woolf in you before you die.
Awesome. Here's a question for all of you. So whoever wants to pick this up. This is a student-generated question. What is the worst book you've managed to finish from beginning to end? 1, what made it horrible? And 3, why did you finish it? Now, as somebody who's once taken a class in pre-law, I would advise you to limit your answers to dead white men. So.
That is a tough one. That's one that you really have, like, that's like the question, yeah, you need time to think about. Why did I finish it? Well, I could go on to, you want me to come back to it? No.
Sometimes you get student manuscripts and you kind of have to read them for like a job.
I've got a class right here, Tony. Back away, back away.
White men in that group.
Yeah. No, wait, I'm thinking about this. So sometimes, like, you know, because you have books, you're like, oh my God, you know. But I think that the reason I keep reading it is like, it is hope. right? Because you keep thinking like it's gonna turn, something's gonna happen. Sometimes you also keep reading kind of, this is terrible, but out of a sense of almost like a car crash. Like you just can't believe like, oh my God, like what's, you know what I mean? Like this is terrible. And you almost want to see how it's gonna wrap up, right? But I'd have to think about like an actual, I had an experience recently, this was kind of really, where I was asked to maybe blurb something and I said yes. And then I started reading it and I was like, I don't want my name on this. You know what I mean? I had to have my agent be like, can you get me out of this? Because it was just the idea like the person, the author deserved to have somebody who loved the book, you know, blurb it, as opposed to somebody who was just like, so, but yeah. Yeah.
I know what my worst book is. It was The Bridges of Madison County. It had just come out and I'd heard so many great things about it. And I read it and I just thought, I won't get those hours back. That said, a lot of people read it. And so clearly people loved it and it meant a lot of people were reading. So, you know, that's just my opinion. And apparently it was a good movie. I never saw the movie.
Meryl Streep.
I did see the movie and I was there and I heard an interview with Meryl Streep, who plays the lead in the movie, who also said it's a bad book. And she's in the movie.
Right. Okay, so I'm not alone.
I would be interested though in pushing the question even further. So again, because you can learn from this, right? So Lysley, like what made it a bad book? Like was it bad characterization? Is it bad?
It was just
what
very, it was very romantic. It was, you know, it was sappy. It was a lot of, you know, kind of cliched sentiments and feelings, which clearly, you know, a lot of people could connect to, but you know, I couldn't connect to it.
My uncle wrote that. No, I'm just teasing. For me, it's like the carelessness in language, Amy. Like I just give up. I kind of like to my other comment before. I feel like the clock is always ticking on mortality, and if I'm really doing well, I'm reading a book a week. So it's not really that 50 books a year. You only get what 2,000 more books. Like if somebody's being really careless with language, maybe after 30 pages, I'll just pick up something that it isn't careless.
Okay, here's a follow-up. What's the worst thing you've ever written? I mean, something you've actually shown to somebody you respected and then wanted to take it back.
You don't publish, you just mean written. Right. So
right. I mean, just being written. So is this like it leaves here on an email someplace, and you just like regret, instant sort of regret. Oh my God, how can I take that back?
Yeah. I feel like in some ways you're not a poet if you don't, because poetry is smaller, right? I mean, it's shorter, you write it faster, and so you can send it out and get like feedback on it faster, right? So it's easy to write a poem and in the night you're like, this is so brilliant, I'm gonna send it to the New Yorker right now. And because of the internet, you're like, boop, 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 submittable, bam, and it's off, right? And then you're like, the next day you wake up and you're like, yeah. I think with poetry, it's pretty easy to do that.
Okay, we can move on.
I feel like
I think people repress all that, right?
You never know if it's any good for like a decade. So you know, it's you send it and then you feel like, oh my God, I think it's horrible. I'm pretty sure it's horrible. I don't know. All you can see are the blood and the nail holes and the struts and the failures and the hidden drafts beneath it. And so you're always like, I think it's probably pretty bad.
Yeah.
And again, like even thinking about like earlier books, like my first book, it's true that there's a poem in my first book, which is about the fact that I was born in Vietnam and, you know, all these kinds of things. And I think about that first poem, and I mean, it's my published first poem. It was the poem that actually got me the Wisconsin Fellowship, and it got me like the Stegner and all these other things. But I think about that poem now, and to me, it feels melodramatic. Like it just feels overwrought in a way. But I realize like where it came from. I always like to make the joke, if you think about like your high school yearbook photos, like that is who you were at that moment. Like you can laugh about it now, but that is who you were. You know what I mean? So Leslie's looking like.
No, I think what Tony said, I don't have a sense, I don't have that strong a sense of what I send out into the world. Like when I sent off my, you know, my novel to my editor, I didn't really have a sense of what I'd sent, and I was expecting her to hate it, and she really liked it. So I don't know. It's just it's weird for all this time that we spend writing. You know, at least for me, I'm never sure what I've put out in the world. I don't know that I can't sort of unequivocally say, oh, I just sent out a good book, I just sent out a bad book. I have no idea. But I enjoyed my most recent 3-star review on Goodreads, so there you go.
Yeah. Awesome. Here's another one. What is the worst bit of writing advice you've ever received? There's a follow-up to this too, you might be prepared for. What is the worst bit of advice you've ever given to a student?
I have to admit, I got both of those down, right? So,
Okay, roll.
So yeah, the worst piece of writing advice I ever received when I was in graduate school, not from somebody at the faculty, but basically, again, going back to the fact that I'm Vietnamese, that I'm half Vietnamese, this person, when they found that out, they were like, oh, that's your story. Like, that's such a gift. Like, so they basically made it seem like I was gonna have to spend my entire career writing about being Vietnamese. I remember hearing that and being like, yeah, no, right? And then as far as some of the worst advice I ever gave to a student, and I've since learned my lesson, I used to think, again, that earlier question about how you can tell if someone's like a field hockey player or a volleyball player or whatever. I used to think that I could tell if somebody was a poet or a fiction writer or what have you, which, like, in hindsight, it's just such hubris, you know what I mean? But I had this student I thought was a super amazing poet, and they were a super amazing poet. And I just thought, like, yeah, you're a poet, like, this is it. And then they took future, other classes, and they realized they're also a fiction writer. So it was just like this idea that I was like, yeah, fiction might not be in your future. It's like, it's poetry, you know what I mean? And so I feel thankful that they didn't follow my advice and that they took other classes in other genres.
Tony, do you have an answer?
Tony?
I don't have an easy one. Mine's not nearly as moving as Amy's. I think, I remember being told, don't start a story with a character waking up. But then I was like, that's what I'm going to do for the next year. Start stories with characters waking up. Every time anybody tries to lay down some rule, you can always find some gorgeous example of a story that breaks that rule. So I'm kind of, the older you get, the more you realize, like, there are no rules. Like, even show versus tell, I'm sure I've given that to hundreds of students. Now it's like my favorite moments are when people are just busting out a bunch of exposition and telling you what the characters are doing and thinking instead of showing you. It's kind of fun. I like it. It's resistance.
Yeah, awesome. Here's another one for you, Tony. This is a student question as well. It says, is the B Hotel real? And if so, did it survive the war?
Hotel B's is not real. I made it up. There was a place I had kind of in mind, but so much, I think the city was 85% destroyed by artillery and bombs. The first time napalm was used in warfare was in this town of Saint-Malo, where this novel is set. So no, I made up the Hotel of Bees. There were some old architecture in the city with honeycombs kind of incorporated into it. So I just kind of imagined, like, what, there's all these corsairs and pirates in this town of Saint-Malo that made a bunch of money illegally, and yet they made these really gorgeous stone mansions with these old wooden beams. I was just curious about what kind of person loves bees enough to, like, build that into the front of their house.
Yeah, awesome. Here's one for you, Lysley.
Hey, Lysley, did Lysley have an answer to worst piece of advice? Like, Lysley, you
okay, very quickly, just to go back to that. It wasn't given to me, but I overheard some writers talk about their brand, and I wanted to gouge my eyes out. And some advice that I've given to writing some of my students that, I don't know, seems to kind of throw them off. And so I try not to, I'm very cautious with this advice that I give. I sometimes say, just because it happened to you doesn't mean it's interesting. And so there's always like a sense of wounded. But
you got a groan from the classroom behind me on that one.
I also once got a teaching evaluation that said I was short-tempered and mocking. So there you go.
Oh, that's like something to live up to.
That'll be on my tombstone.
All right. Oh, let's follow that up, Lysley. Here's one. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much research on catfishing did you have to do for the novel?
Okay, so I didn't realize that's what catfishing means. So I did some research. I definitely did some research, the old Google thing, but there is this phenomenon that some have called the Filipino marriage scam or the Filipino love scam. I think The Atlantic might have even done an article about these, like, Asian women who dupe the American men looking for the subservient Asian wife. They sort of kind of turn the tables on them. So I did some research. It was fun, but I've never done that to anybody. I've never made anyone on the internet fall in love with me, as far as I know. After this event, who knows?
Tonight's the night.
Yeah. Me and Tony, I don't know what this is going to do to you, but be strong.
All right, looks like we have a question. This is from the general audience, and it is, looks like, how do you research before writing science? This is obviously to Tony. Research before writing science. I adore the narrative in About Grace, particularly with your descriptions of snowflakes, and I was wondering if you had a process for writing science.
Yeah, the word I'd want to kind of remove from the equation is before. Hopefully that's helpful to students. I think there's this idea, I don't know where we get it, of a writer going to like some wood paneled library and doing all kinds of research and then walking to his white man estate and creating with his quill. And for me, research and fiction writing are always hand in hand. Like sometimes you're 3 sentences in and she takes a left on what street and you're like, oh crap, I don't know exactly what would be on this street in Oakland, California when Excel's walking to the pizza shop, or what's in a Target and in this book. And so for me, I'm walking to Target 3 sentences into my day. And so in terms of science, I had a nice background having a mom as a science teacher. And so those books were always around my home. And I was always kind of being drilled as a nerdy little kid on the Latin names of insects, but I was still, just filling in information by researching things all the time. So I think research can be procrastination, and sometimes you can kind of kill your morning just chasing curiosities around the internet or through books. But I love to try to find out things that I might be able to use in fiction because I've written myself into a dark place. I think sometimes you're writing yourself not into, maybe it ties in with the last question about advice. You don't write what you know, but you write kind of what you want to know. At least that's the case for me.
Great.
I remember when the 3 of us were fellows, like maybe at some lunch that we were having where Tony was talking about the side that we needed a writing lab. And so the writing lab would be a place where you could go and try things out that you were going to do in your stories. Right. So if you're going to kill somebody, like you had to know what's that actually going to be, like to shoot or whatever. So it's this idea, like, I still like this idea that we're going to have this space where writers can come and try out like whatever it is that they're going to do. So if anybody wants to fund that.
Totally. Like we could walk around we could go key silver Mercedeses and like one person's like, this is what it smells like. And another person's like, this is what it feels like.
Right.
Like we didn't do a good enough job. Let's find another silver Mercedes.
Okay, here's a direct one from the audience. Ready for this? What are you all drinking? And did you plan and coordinate this? What does your drink choice say about your book and or writing style?
Interesting. I'm drinking Jameson from my home bar.
All right.
This was my mother's sewing machine. Like if you flip it open, the sewing machine pops up. We decided to convert it to a bar. It's exactly what she dreamed her whole life, that her sewing machine would be turned into a bar. I'm drinking Jameson. Typically, I drink. It's actually funny when I'm really working. If I'm going to drink, I actually will drink. I'm more likely to drink like scotch or whiskey, but like post writing, I'm more likely to have a martini. Very dry, very cold.
Yes. Tony?
We did not coordinate it. It just occurred to me when I saw Lysley have a drink. I'm having a glass of white wine, a little, I don't know, some kind of a blend.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So again, I have the very fancy glass, but in my very fancy glass is Trader Joe's sparkling black tea. So I don't know what this says about me, that maybe my writing is all surface, but then, when it actually, like, I don't know. So yeah, that's what I'm drinking.
This is a question for me to Amy. There's not a lot of books out there about field hockey, and is there a field hockey mafia of ex-players? Did any of those people reach out to you and say, yeah, finally you remember the sisterhood now, or did they write back and say, oh, I'm sorry, this wasn't a good enough representation? Or What was that like? Because I remember the coach that reached out to you last year, and I wondered if you'd had similar experiences.
Yeah. That was crazy. So again, I played field hockey in the 1980s in Danvers, Massachusetts, on the North Shore of Boston. And so since my book has come out, I have Zoomed a couple of times with many people who were on my field hockey team with me, like back in the day. And so it's crazy, like 30 years later, we're back on Zoom and everybody's personalities are the exact same thing. And then as you mentioned, so when I read in Madison, Wisconsin, back in, oh my gosh, like March, there was a woman in her 80s who came up to me who it turned out had actually been a former coach at Danvers back in the 1950s or 60s, and then had moved to Madison, so it was crazy. As far as other people reaching out to me, I think I've mentioned that the National Field Hockey Association has a newsletter, and they actually interviewed me when the book came out, and it was really interesting because the guy kept asking me all these questions about like how my book, what kind of messages my book has for student athletes, and again, it's like I didn't really necessarily write it for student athletes, but he's like, well, what can the student athlete take away from your novel, you know? And so I kind of punted on that one, pun intended. And I mostly just talked about like the idea of friendship and how sports builds friendship and all that kind of fun stuff, which is true because again, I'm still friends with people 30 years on, you know, and again, like I said, our personalities are the same. We still all get along. We're still all friends. So I guess that would be the takeaway. But no, nobody has contacted me and been like, I played field hockey for 6 years. So I do think the field hockey aspect of it is pretty accurate. Although somebody did ask me if my field hockey team actually did use witchcraft to win games. And that one, I'll just say no comment. So.
Okay, here's one. Not counting tonight, what's the strangest situation you've encountered at a public reading or book signing?
Not counting tonight, okay.
Not counting tonight.
Oh boy.
I mean, there's got to be all kinds of characters who show up and ask you very personal questions or claim to be your uncle, or
I will give them time to think about it. But again, it didn't happen to me, but it's the legendary one that happened here in Madison many years ago when Charlie Baxter came to read. So Charlie Baxter, amazing fiction writer, short story writer, novelist, very famous teacher, gives this amazing reading at what used to be Canterbury Books. And at the end of his reading, when he says, "Are there any questions?" the first question, somebody in the audience raises her hand and just says, "Why so vague?" we still talk about that to this day, like, why so vague? You know, I was like, so yeah.
Speaking, this was also vague. I once did a reading, and this young woman in the front row during the Q&A raised her hand, and her question was, "Do you achieve?" I have no idea what she meant by do you achieve, and then her follow-up question was, "Do you reflect?" And I had no idea what she meant. So that was probably it.
did you try to stumble through an answer, or how did you handle it?
I think I said, "Do I reflect like in the mirror?" Like how vampires don't reflect? I don't know. I probably tried to make a joke out of it, which might have made her feel bad. So it probably wasn't the right move, but I don't think I handled it as well.
Yeah. Tony, you give it.
Was the adjective crazy in the question, Ron? What was the adjective that they were asking? The craziest moment?
Strangest.
Strangest. The one that's coming to mind is more emotional. You know, this book took me a long time. I wrote 2 books as procrastination for it. And I took 3 trips to Europe, and we didn't have tons of money, and we had 2 little twin boys at home. And, you know, I was walking around this town, and I interviewed a few people who could speak English, but I can't speak French very well, and trying to translate journals with like Google Translate and looking at these the buildings in this town, and never sure if I would actually be able to finish the book. So when it came out, I did the end of this exhausting French tour. I did an event in Saint-Malo, and you know, it's like an interview, and this translator is going a mile a minute in French, and you don't really know if the audience is getting your jokes or if anything's working. And afterward, so many old folks who had survived the bombing, who were in their 80s and 90s, came up to me, and I was just weeping most of the time. It was just like this incredible moment where you're like, this stuff I made up in my basement, working hard on hoping that I was getting these details right, actually moved people for whom the experience was memory. that was overwhelming for me. So, and maybe the ways Lysley was surprised by the word catfishing, or Amy's like not necessarily thinking like this is a book for student athletes. Sometimes you're just so caught up in the minutia of making something and trying to get it to work that the act of sharing it always is full of so many surprises.
Awesome. Another question for you, Tony. And this one reads, I've heard that you work on several projects simultaneously. How do you manage that? How do you, what tells you to move from one project to the next?
Yeah, I'd love to hear the other two on this too. For me, it's mostly about managing the despair of long projects, because there's always an initial enthusiasm that can compel me or propel me for maybe 3 or 4 months. I'm really into it, like the Panama Canal project I was describing earlier. But then there's always like this lull where you're like, you run out of steam and you're like, oh, actually, this is going to be super hard. I thought this was going to be fun the whole time. And so then often I'll start up smaller projects just to try to give myself the sensation of finishing things, to remind myself that I might even be capable of finishing things. Also, if it's under 1,000 words or maybe 1,500 words, you can work on the whole thing in one day and try to get it done, even if it's just an op-ed for a newspaper or something. So sometimes just having those little rewards in the midst of a long project can be really useful for me. What do you guys think?
Amy?
Well, I was gonna say, especially because I work in more than one genre. And so it's an easy way to always feel like you're always moving. Like, even if you are not really moving, you can feel like, well, I'm working in a different genre. Maybe I'm not working in a different genre, but at least you think you're working, right? So, and especially because poetry, you can write a poem. Like, I can sit down and write a poem in 3, 4, 5, 6 hours, even if it's not perfect. Like, I can feel like I accomplished something, you know what I mean? So I think that's probably one of the reasons why I do like to work in various genres. And it's also because when I was a kid, I always wanted to be a writer, and I never made distinctions about poetry or fiction or playwriting or what have you, right? So I think that because of that, I do tend to, work in different kinds. Like, I only have a certain amount of energy in one genre, and then when that goes away, I'll slip into another genre and then see how much energy I have there, and But that's how I talk. And sometimes on my best days, that's true. But most of the time, I'm really not genre slipping as much as I like to think I am. So maybe disregard that.
Okay.
Here's
another one.
I can't multitask. I can only work on one thing at a time. This home bar was like a major home renovation that took the combined efforts of 2 writers with tenure. And that was one.
Oh, awesome. Here's another one for you, Amy. Can you talk about your choice of writing in the first person plural for Sticks? In what ways do the many characters represent you?
Oh, yeah. I've gotten this question before, and I know I've talked about it with these 2 guys in the past too, because Tony has a couple of things that have been written in first person plural as well. So some really famous examples of first person plural, the we voice, again, is Jeffrey Eugenides, The Virgin Suicides. So again, it's a group of teenage boys who are basically watching this family of girls, and the boys tell the story. So I knew when I was writing We Write Upon Sticks, I knew I wanted it to be a collective voice. My joke is that there's no I in team, but I just couldn't quite figure out the voice was going to belong to. Like, was the voice going to belong to, at first I had it belonging just to the freshman girls team. There's a way in which freshman girls oftentimes know everything about senior girls, and like they're obsessed with them, but then that didn't really work. And then I thought maybe it was going to be the entire school telling the story of this one team. But then towards the end, I realized, no, it's really just the team telling their voice. And so thinking about, I'm interested in other people's thoughts too, like about like first person plural. I find it's a fun voice. And if you don't overthink it, you can do all kinds of things. But it's true, if you try and like think logically about it, you can get yourself like stuck in a corner because you're like, wait, right. So you just it's almost like intuitive. You almost just have to do it. But I don't know, what do you guys think about like first person plural?
I love it. I love reading it. And I have one published story that's in first person plural, and it was super duper fun to write. I wish more people would do it. I think it's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought this was just a totally genius decision for this book. It's like, it's a book of resistance in so many ways, like against like a male athletic narrative, and even resist like the expectation that we're going to have like, the climax is building up to overtime of the championship or something. But maybe the biggest resistance is that a novel must have a single protagonist, acting out against an antagonist. And here you get to see this multiplicity of these kids. It's so, I don't know. I just thought it was brilliant. It really makes the book in a lot of ways, that decision.
Here's another one for all of you. the more experience you have with writing, do you find it's easier to give up on projects? Do you know earlier when something is a bad idea? You've all given things up.
That's a great question.
Does it get easier? I mean, can you smell it earlier now so you don't dedicate so much time to it?
Yeah, I don't think there's necessarily bad ideas. You just kind of figure out how long your energy can be sustained and how long you think a reader will be engaged. And that's all trial and error. So I'm not sure if I can say you get any better at that. You just keep trying things and then you sleep and wake up and read them and see if you're interested in them.
Yeah. And thinking about my first two novels, or my only two novels, it's true, like I threw away a lot of pages before I got to the beginning of them. And actually, one of the books I'm talking about is a book that won't be out until 2022. So I'm actually not talking about this particular book. Like this particular book, I didn't actually throw away as many pages. I still threw stuff away, but not as much as I normally do. And I've just started work on another book. And in this book so far, you know, I haven't thrown away that much. So maybe my process of throwing stuff away is getting a little, but again, never say, because that's the fastest way to have a bad outcome.
I think for me, it's about figuring out how much you really care about something. I have a story in my first book. It's a book of stories. The last story in the book took me probably about 10 years to get right. I mean, I worked on other things in between, of course, but I kept thinking, I'll just put it away. But I kept taking it out and trying to work on it. And I think it's because I really, really cared about the story. So I think if you really, really care about something, you'll know to keep it. And if you don't really, if your care for a particular story is questionable, then maybe it's not a thing to commit to.
Maybe the fallacy in that question is there isn't one single idea that you're chasing. You're building like this cluster chain of ideas and over a period of weeks and months. And so sometimes somebody says, you know, oh, in Super Assassin, Lysley, why don't you try this? And then that marinates in his head for 2 years and then he tries it. So sometimes you're just questioning like idea number 73 in the chain and you try a different one and see how that kind of fractals out. So, you know, sometimes you just have to keep trying things and making things and chase those ideas and don't judge them as bad or good until you figured out if you've exhausted your interest in them.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what Lysley was I can't remember what word Lysley was just using, but for me, it really does more and more as I'm doing this more and more, like there is an element of fun. Like in some ways, I don't want to say like my first novel was more labored, but maybe it's also, it's a lot more lyrical. It's a lot more poetic. So maybe that was why, but it's true. Like this book, I wrote it, I hate to say, I wrote it pretty fast. Like I wrote it in a year. And again, it's because like I knew these girls and it was fun. It really was fun. Like, you know, so I do think that sometimes, I think like, for example, like David Foster Wallace, this is just my opinion, but I actually think that his essays are his great work and not necessarily his fiction. But he supposedly, from what I've read, he thought his fiction was his great work because his fiction was harder for him to write. Like he could write those essays. He obviously just had that kind of brain and just, but he didn't think that that was his great work. Whereas I think like, no, they did seem maybe easy for him. And that's actually what makes them great, you know? So I think that this fallacy that we have to be laboring at something is maybe, you know, holding us back sometimes.
Totally. Even if you think, you know, even if you want to take on huge ideas, like what does it mean to be an adolescent girl, you know, going through coming of age or falling in love or getting lost, you still sometimes need to play. I mean, that's what we love to do as humans is play. Like the Hotel of Bees question I got earlier, that's just me playing around. I'm just playing with this stuff. And suddenly you find out, oh, readers actually catch on to that stuff they like when you're playing.
Okay, direct question this is aimed at Lysley. Lysley, do you have any quick and dirty rules for writing dialogue?
Oh God, I hate writing dialogue. We were just going over dialogue in the class that I teach the other day. I hate writing dialogue. I always say that if I could, all my characters would be telepathic so that they wouldn't actually have to speak. But one of the best pieces of writing advice I ever got from a writing teacher from the late John LaRue, rest in peace. He told us, and I think he borrowed this maybe from another writer. He said, dialogue is something characters do to each other. And I think that was really helpful to sort of separate yourself from this idea that dialogue is about two people speaking. It's really about what characters can do to each other subtextually. I also think it's important to remember that dialogue for me is also about what is happening outside the dialogue. So what's happening outside the quotation marks, if you use quotation marks, is just as relevant to the dialogue as the things that they say. So if a character says hello, but they're doing this as they say hello, it's nice to see you again, this is just as important, if not more important, than that actual hello.
Great. We have a general question now from the audience here. This is from Olivia, and this is addressed to everyone. What advice do you have for beginning writers? What writing exercises or routines prove to be the most useful?
For me, the advice is if you're going to commit to writing, you need to remember it's work, and work is often unpleasant. I think a lot of Americans do not enjoy working. I don't enjoy working, but you still got to do it at some point. The best exercise routine that I can recommend is this app called the World's Most Dangerous Writing app. If you go to the website, the World's Most Dangerous Writing app, it forces you to write. You can work in 3 or 5 or 10-minute increments. And once you start typing, if you pause for 7 seconds, you lose everything you've written. And this message that says you failed will appear on the screen. To generate material, if you know what you need to write about, but you're not sure how to say it, I use that app for a lot of my novel, and it worked.
Really?
Wow, that just sounds so
7 seconds.
Yeah.
Awesome.
You
I love
sound like the beginning, Debbie Allen at the beginning of Fame when she walks around hitting people.
You want fame? You pay in sweat. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I've got one. This is just addressed to all 3 of you. When you were here.
Okay, wait, I want to answer. I
Go
think
ahead.
this too. So in thinking about the best piece of advice to you, I think maybe we would say the same thing. It's reading. Like there's no way if you want to be a writer and you don't read. Yeah. So.
Okay.
Anything to add?
I agree with Amy, and read across, like read poems, read stuff that isn't what you want to write. Read all kinds of stuff. I mean, like just because you want to be a jazz pianist doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to hip hop and try classical. And I think that's how you should read too. See what's out there. There's a reason people talk about Joan Didion. You might not get it when you're 17 or when you're 27, but try it again. Or there's a reason a lot of people like Melville. Just try it. And if it doesn't work for you, 5 years later, it might work.
Yeah, awesome. So here's one directed at 20 years ago. I got a bottle with a message in it in my mailbox, and it was wound up in there. And I took it out. I thought it was a love note from somebody. It wasn't signed, but it was actually a quote from Emily Dickinson. And I was walking around and said, "God, I wonder who did this." And Tony said, "Oh, that was me, man." That was me. Yeah. But he said, "Yeah, we did that in Beer and Crafts." And I've always wanted to ask you, what was Beer and Crafts?
Oh man, I can't
Wait,
believe
so
Kuka
before
never
you answer
came to
Beer and
Beer.
Crafts, your memory from 20 years ago is not quite right. So what you got in the mail was, you might have gotten the thing, but it looked like it was black. It was very macabre.
Yes.
And it had an Emily Dickinson quote in it about
Right.
it was a Valentine, and I made it. It's for you.
You made it.
Yeah, it was a very macabre Valentine that we made it.
My life is flashed in front of me.
Tony now can explain the tradition of Beer and Crafts.
Oh, I know. I can't believe Ron never came to Beer and Crafts. It's crushing. Beer and Crafts was when you just put glitter all over the place in your apartment. We just put a big table out with tons of construction paper and beers and hearts. And it was on Valentine's Day, running up to Valentine's Day. And you make Valentines for your friends.
Yeah.
Right. It was also the night after attending Tony's Beer and Crafts that I have no recollection of this, vomited in the stairwell of my apartment.
Well, let's call it a night.
Yeah.
On that note.
That's what Wisconsin can do to a person.
In my defense, I was only 12 years old at the time.
Okay. And finishing your second novel.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, well, I promised to get out. Our time is up. This is unbelievable, but I think we should go over time just a little bit in case you guys had questions for each other. Anything you wanted to ask each other.
Okay, I have a question for the two of you.
Yeah.
What's getting you through this horrible pandemic? What's the thing that's like really kind of helping day to day? I could use the advice.
I have to admit, and it makes me sound like, again, I'm not, but I've had a very long meditation practice. So it's not something that I just started now. right? I mean, I think you can start a meditation practice now and it would be good for you, right? But it's true that I've been doing this for like many years. And so because I had that to draw on, it's true that it's helping me like now. It's also true, like I'm a New Englander, you know, like I always kind of like wanted to live in my parents' attic and just write poems and never see anybody. So in some ways, this is like, it's kind of working out for me, you know what I mean? But yeah.
Wow.
Good to know.
Hey, you guys,
I'm
it's
just
so
lucky, Leslie, that I've been finishing a book. Being downhill on a book has been huge. So I can work 9 or 10-hour days. I still have like this Trump ravaging sound in my head all the time, but I'm able, maybe like Amy's meditation practice, once I'm about 5 minutes in, I kind of forget about Trump for about 9 hours, and then it's back and I feel miserable. But having work has been an incredible blessing. I'm so lucky. All of us are so lucky that we're able to continue doing what we love to do during this thing.
That's great. I think we should sign off with that hopeful note. It's been so great seeing all you guys again. Go out and buy these books. They're fantastic. I
Thanks,
can't
Ron.
recommend them enough. There we go. Thank you, Tony.
And then just really finally, I'll say, so again, the next Wisconsin Wednesday, I think that Michigan mentioned at the very beginning of the happens on October 21st. I do believe at 7 p.m. So fiction writer and a poet will be here. So tune in then if you can. And again, support our local independent bookstores from all around the state. So fabulous.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Fabulous.
Bye, guys. Thanks, everyone, for
Bye.
tuning in. Take care, you guys.
Bye.